wellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, featuring your hosts Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And before we crack into today's podcast, Finding Your Way in Sibling Rivalry, which we realised for some reason we have not yet touched, and yet is relevant to so many of us, both of us, and certainly many of you, our beautiful listeners in our tribe, we just want to remind you to jump onto nourishingthemother.com.au and sign up to join our tribe. On the front page there, there's a little box where you can fill out your name and email address. Each week you'll get an email from us that just wraps up with links and blurbs on everything that we've posted, done, podcast on during the week, so you can pick and choose what you'd like to listen to and expand further. And then occasionally we send you another email where we've had an epiphany, an insight, quiet conversation between ourselves that we'd like to share because there's wisdom resonating with it, and just to kind of dive a little bit deeper with you. So if you'd really like to do that with us, please join up to join our tribe on nourishingthemother.com.au.
And I love this topic. I love that we've now kind of finally got here. And I wonder if I think we've kind of got here in two parts, because clearly it's a natural stage that parents find themselves at with young children, or with any kind of multiples.
Yeah.
But it's also where I'm finding myself now that Sylvie is much more mobile and Hugo's feeling threatened.
Yeah.
And so there's much more, biffo on his part going on.
What do you mean, biffo?
Oh, he's just, he's just, like he'll donk her on the head, or he'll try and push her out of the way. And so it's helping both of them find their way in that.
Yeah.
And
it's hard, isn't it? Because you think the intensive part of parenting is in that first 6 months, but I really don't think it is. It's as they get older.
Yeah, totally. It was easy the first 6 months.
Yeah, it's easy to ignore a baby, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's easy to have them there and we think it's all sweet and beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's when they develop their personalities, when those personalities are recognised by siblings within that environment.
There's a sense of feeling threatened.
Yeah, it's full on. And then all of a sudden you're in this realm of parenting where it's a bit like helicopter parenting.
Yeah, it is. And I'm noticing that I'm definitely having to be a lot more tuning in to where, particularly Hugo, where his emotional state is at. Yeah. Because I will know that if he's feeling like lots of big feelings and he's really triggered and he's in a bit of a difficult phase of the day, I need to be right there, because otherwise she'll cop it.
Yeah.
And so it's tuning into what's going on all the time with the kids and where I need to be to help them work through stuff.
And so how are you going with that? Because that's a lot of, we can have our own plans for rhythm, but that's tuning very much into, well, more essentially your one child's rhythm.
Yeah.
And basing everybody else's around that. So how are you going with that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm really tuning in particularly with like what I see as like the red flags in his own behaviour that show to me that he's getting a little bit offline.
So how do you know what the red flags are?
So for him, it is really kind of erratic, kind of wildish, can't rein it in type, not listening to me, so kind of just
like a heightened energy
a bit scattered. Like it's almost like he needs help to kind of come back into his centre.
Yeah. Okay.
So he'll be just off the Richter and crazy, which is normal for a 4-year-old at the same time. But there's certain things that he does that I can just, like, he won't look at me when I speak to him sometimes, or he's kind of, his eyes are kind of fluttering around like they can't focus on something, and he's just edgy. Also when he is short-tempered with me, or he has a certain whiny tone, I can see that he's really not feeling.
He's hitting an edge
himself.
Of some sort.
He's hitting an edge. And for me, I know that if I don't work with that edge, and if I don't find ways to help him move through that, then it will come out in challenging behaviour. And Sylvie's often the source of that. So if she's trying to get things that he wants, when he's not in a good place within himself, he will push back at her, and he will, push her away or take things off her. And whereas I know when he's really really balanced, they play together beautifully. As we know, when most kids are feeling online and connected to themselves, then they relate well to other children. When they're feeling offline, disconnected, they don't, and there's that source of conflict. But it's a really new thing for me to be finding this, because she's just started crawling so she can get into everything, and she knows what she wants. And she's starting to stand up for herself as well. In the past he'd be able to take things from her and she wouldn't really mind. And I'm quite okay with, as much as I can, standing back when it's safe, and allowing them to navigate that themselves, because I really do believe that if I go into bat too much for her, that'll actually make her even more of a target for him, because I'm almost infatuating with her, right? Like I'm almost over supporting her, which is then going to make her the culprit of even more of his angst, yeah. Whereas I think that there's wisdom in allowing them to find their own relationship without too much of my emphasis on trying to protect one or the other, or kind of be the judge or the jury around it.
So what are you witnessing when you're allowing that space, and how long do you let it go for, and what's coming up for you?
Well, there's so much coming up. I work backwards from there. So much comes up for me. And so much comes up for me when I notice that he's trying to snatch things off her, or when I see him try to push her out of the way. And I think it's because it plugs me back into my own childhood dynamic with my brother, because him and I used to fight a lot, and we're really quiet.
And you're the older sibling.
And I was the older sibling, yeah. So, and I see like myself really almost like facing my own darkness through seeing his behaviour in this way.
In what way? What sort of darkness?
Like just badness, right? Like so when I see him as doing things intentionally that I see as intentionally trying to hurt her, I feel rageful, because on some level it's not okay, and on some level I wonder if flipping the tables was that me, and that behaviour not being okay for my mum. And so I'm almost plugged back into that really primal lower brain stuff that I'm patterned with around how to respond to that. Because I get very, I all of a sudden hear myself get very controlling, like I'm wanting to control, and I'm wanting to just stop it, and just make it go away in a very non-conscious way. So that's a real edge that I'm finding within myself around him and where he's at, which is totally me at 4.5, and me trying to navigate those same sibling dynamics, and those same, I guess, being seen by my mother that I perhaps was trying to reach, with it as a child myself. So finding the line between what's him and what's me is difficult sometimes when so many parents would identify with this, when you're so deeply in an emotionally charged thing with your kid. All sense and reason, even though you're talking to a 4-year-old, can go out the window, because you just want to make it go away, or whatever it is, whatever that source of pain for you is, you want to stop it.
So in this moment when Hugo is, let's say, snatching a toy off of Sylvie, and you're noticing and observing from a safe distance, and you're kind of higher mind observing the feelings and reactions that are coming up in your body. What are you doing in those moments then, when you're feeling triggered back to that inner child stuff, and then are you coming back to it later?
Yeah, it depends on the day, and it's interesting, like, some days I'm able to be really high-minded, take a breath, know what's about to come out of my mouth and change it, to be much more where I am right now with my own children, and being centered in that. And, as much as I can, I really try and look at Sylvie for cues. So if she's okay with whatever's going on, I'm going to follow her lead on that. So if she's not...
So if he snatched the toy and she's not too fussed by it, you're not going to fuss by it.
I'm not going to fuss by it. Because also, I can't begin to assume how she feels. I need to look at her to understand how she feels, rather than me project onto that situation whatever I perceive is going on. So that's kind of my...
So what's the not okay bit for you?
The not okay bit for me is the pushing or the pulling of her when she's clearly unhappy, like even tonight in the bath, like, there was a point at which she wasn't happy anymore, and he was holding her and grabbing her, and she wasn't liking it. And I gave him enough warnings, and he still didn't listen, and that was the point at which I just got so angry, and I wanted to rescue her. I wanted to save her from that. I wanted to make him wrong and bad and away from her to get her to a safe place, which I also think is that mother bear instinct coming out as well. But But there's no doubt about that being very
but particularly
much a
body
wound.
autonomy is very big for you.
It is. It really
Yeah.
is. And people feeling heard is really big for me. And when he continually went past the point of not listening to her, that was when I was really
triggering
not
some
okay.
big stuff for you.
Yeah.
So what did you do?
I took her out and I said, look, I'm going to come back and talk to you in a minute. And so I took her out. And
So
got
what
her
were you
dressed and
doing with your
stuff.
big feelings in those moments?
Breathing. And being,
Because this is what I want to talk about,
but also
because we all
being
get triggered.
angry, right? But also being angry in that, and also sitting with how I felt about being really angry and making my son wrong, because I really have been sitting with this whole conscious parenting thing and this whole aware parenting thing, and but at the same time overlaying the fact that the border of support and challenges were where we all most grow, and that loving our children means sometimes being really damn firm with them, you know, when our boundaries are overstepped. And I really feel okay with that when I give language and voice and reason to it in a way that helps my child see it as something constructive, you know, where I can make it about me and about what's not okay for me, as opposed to them being inherently bad or wrong. And that's really kind of the way that I
Good
come at it.
definition. Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, I had to come back and talk to him about that. And the next thing that's pissing me off is when I try and reprimand him and, you know, have these hard conversations with him, he won't look at me. You know, which is because it's hard. It's hard to be told off. And I really get that. But it pisses me off that he won't look at me, that he won't engage, and that he'll try to do everything he can to avoid the conversation.
What sort of things does he do to avoid the conversation?
Keep trying to play, or like go and fuss over here, or if he's not, because tonight he was in the bus, so he couldn't really go anywhere. But, you know, just earlier on tonight it was, you know, just trying to play with other toys or do anything he could to kind of squirm away.
Yeah.
And I don't like that lack of ownership.
Yeah. No, I know. I really struggle with it too, because my oldest and youngest do that as well.
Yeah. It's hard.
It's big. It's a big journey.
Yeah. So I don't have the answers for that yet. I'm really working through that one.
I just want to bring it back, though, to a toolkit, because, you know, our listeners, we know so many of our tribe get in these situations, which we all do, where we're triggered.
Yeah.
But we're dealing in the same moment with our little children plus our own little inner child. And so I just want to bring it back to a toolkit there just briefly. I mean, I know we do a lot of it in line parenting and so on and so forth, but just for the sake of our listener here listening to this going, this same thing's happening in my house and it makes me go, "Argh!" What can I do to bring more consciousness?
Yeah, I think the thing that I've been trying to notice within myself is like, what kind of outcome am I seeking from the conversations I'm trying to have around this stuff with him too? Like, am I seeking for him to admit that he was wrong or bad? Am I seeking for him to somehow make amends? And like the part of me that's very, you know, eye for an eye wants that, you know, like that part of me that, you know, kind of wants to say, well, you know, you deserved it, blah, 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 like that, almost very unconscious, you know, 1980s parenting style comes out to play sometimes like that. But no, I think I really want it to be, you know, stacking of conversations, stacking of you know, opportunity to display what's okay and what's not okay for me, and not always accept that he's going to hear that, but also be okay with the fact that he's not always going to hear it because he's 4. And I'm sure even when he's 8, there's going to be things that he is able to hear and not able to hear. But that's, you know, that is also respecting that he's his own whole person too, and we're both bringing to the relationship our own stuff to each help each other work through it. And I guess I'm no more right than perhaps he is, even though, you know, I want to be the right one. You know, we as parents want to be right, really.
So in the moment, so that's the conversation you're having with your child after the event. What are you doing with yourself in the moment? So you said before you're breathing.
Trying to breathe, in the moment.
Consciously breathing, how?
But it depends. I mean, sometimes in the moment I'm not even doing anything. I'm just reacting, right? Because if it's a big enough trigger, you can't do anything but react. And you can read all the conscious parenting books you want. And if you've got an emotional charge there, and if it's a big one, you cannot do anything but react. And that will be where I will tell him how I'm feeling really angry and it's not okay what I just did and I need to walk away and calm myself down before work. I come back and have a conversation.
That's a toolkit.
It's usually what I do. I've never said you're so blah blah blah, or I can't believe you did blah blah blah. Like, I really try to avoid making directives or label. Really don't want to label him. Really don't want to call him naughty or anything like that. It's more about the behaviour, really trying to isolate the behaviour, and work at it from that angle, as opposed to trying to colour him in any way as a person. Is the way that I try to approach it. But yeah, it's one of those things. I think sometimes you get it perfect, and other times you keep hitting that same thing until you figure out what it is and you break through that.
That's hashtag parenting.
Yeah, that's right.
There's no way around it.
No.
And we keep creating or having the situations created for us until we can, transform those.
Yeah, and I mean, play's a big one for us too. So really noticing where I could use play. And so tonight was one of those where I could see he wasn't playing well with Sylvie, and was getting annoyed with her pretty easily, and was trying to hit me with like a little tool thing. And I tried the whole, I'm not going to let you do that to me. I don't want you to hurt me with your body. We don't do that. We don't hurt each other with our bodies. And tried to take it off him, and then he tries to get it, and then at that point I'm like, okay, I've enforced my point enough. Now it's time to help him shift. And so then we played like 10 minutes of dinosaurs, where I was like what was I? Triceratops, and he was T-Rex, and so we were going, kind of playing horns and, little claws and stuff at each other for 10 minutes, which really helped to shift both of us, really, because I was in that icky place too. Yeah. But
and so what are you doing with Sylvie? So Sylvie's nearly 1.
Yeah.
So helping her in these sibling situations, what are you doing with her?
With her, when it's happening, when she is hurt or she is frustrated, first going to her. So as much as I can, rather than yelling at Hugo or getting frustrated with him or making it about him, I'm first of all addressing her hurt or her discomfort before I then address what happened, to help her give voice to herself.
So how are you doing that?
So that might be, oh wow, that really frustrated you. You feel really upset. I can see you're really upset that he just took that from you, and hold her and listen to her. So a variation of that is usually what I'll do first, and then talk to Hugo about what just happened. And, you can see now she's upset. She was playing with that. And, can you find something else for her to play with, or can you give that back to her for a little while, and then when she's finished she can give it to you, that kind of thing.
And how do those negotiations go generally?
Pretty good, yeah. And I mean, up until now, I really haven't had, really any major issues. Like, there's been a lot of fluidity between their relationship, and he is, like, I think I've commented before, almost sometimes over the top loving to her. So I haven't had any major bust-ups, but I'm totally well aware that it's going to happen. It has to, right? And they both need that. Like, I can really see the benefit to to a relationship of having that as siblings. We all would have stories of that growing up, and it builds resilience and it helps, build communication skills and all of those things. But I totally see as a parent how much incredible value we can bring when we help our children communicate. And when we help our children learn boundaries. Because I think if our children can learn boundaries for themselves through their sibling relationships, I mean, that can set them up for life in terms of the boundaries that they set with those around them in relationships,
and how
in
they
the
handle
world.
themselves.
Yeah, so I take really seriously my role in helping to equip both of them with those skills.
Yeah.
But doesn't mean it's not freaking brutal sometimes when I am plugged right back into my own stuff, because, our parents would never have given any thought to how to help us communicate, or how to help us feel heard, or how to help us, develop our own body autonomy or anything like that. They're all things that we're doing as, I guess, in some ways, like,
breaking a mold.
Breaking a mold, which is empowering, but also painful sometimes.
Yeah, challenging.
Yeah,
it definitely is.
I mean, I know in your case with having much older kids and having faced these dynamics, which would be interesting because your kids are so much closer in age, the older two.
Yeah, they are.
That would have, I imagine, brought up from the get-go the need for a toolkit. What does it look like for you as they've grown?
Look, I really resonate with what you're saying. I think it's the same. I think that my oldest two are only 18 months apart. So, I think I've said before or joked about the first 6 months is, kind of bliss in a way for me, because it's like the baby doesn't kind of exist. I mean, I know they exist, but largely, the house doesn't really function around them. It functions around the older child. Yeah. And they're not in anybody's way. And they're not snatching toys, and they're not talking back, and they're not crying at the other, they're not doing anything that creates enough friction for you to have to really deal with stuff. And I never had crawlers. So, I didn't have that particular dynamic, but both my older two were walking by one. So by the time Jade was Sylvie's age, she was walking. Yeah. So I guess I didn't have that earlier part of crawling and reaching toys. We always took things to her, so again, bypass that. But then, you get to one and she's walking anyway. Yeah. And it was pretty much the same as what you're talking about, and pretty much, handled it a similar sort of way. I don't think I should have any more light. I guess I still really sit with, and you and I were briefly talking about it beforehand, that in any bully victim dynamic, the interesting factor is that both victim and bully are feeling exactly the same emotion. It's simply that one is an outward expression out towards someone with the pain, and one is an inward expression inwardly with the pain. And so it's a really interesting when you look at the dynamic of there is no right or wrong, because they're both feeling exactly the same thing. They're just different expressions. And they require then different toolkits, because one requires a toolkit on how to handle the pain and stop projecting it outwards, how to bring it inwards. And the other one needs to understand how to find a voice and strength and place and bring it outwards.
So it doesn't therefore need to be overpowered externally.
So I always find that really interesting, and just even observing in those moments, whoever I'm choosing to side with, emotionally we always kind of pick a side, don't we, depending on what our wound is. Is to recognise that exact same feeling is happening in that other child. Exact same feeling. And so it's just looking at the different forms of the same, different expressions of the same emotion. And then as soon as I can get to a place of going, it kind of eliminates for me the good, bad, right, wrong, needing to pick a side thing, and I can then look at, okay, what's the toolkit that's needed here? Because any dynamic is only coming up because both parties need a toolkit. One needs a strengthening one, and one needs another version of strengthening, but it's different muscles.
There's a good one a good kind of step-by-step process that you've shared with our tribe before.
The sentences?
The sentences. Obviously that doesn't apply with babies.
No.
But for the children when they're a bit older, what does that look like?
We call them I statements. I statements are around everywhere. There's certainly a number of places you could find them. But it was around because particularly with my oldest, he can do that whole shutdown and avoidance thing. So he never really wants to own his part in any situation. And so kind of largely sprung out of that was how to, and because he's so methodical, because he's very, very masculine and he doesn't slip into, I really don't know wholeheartedly if the masculine is able to intimately know empathy. I think it's very much a learned and developed skill/muscle for the masculine. My experience is that in the feminine, the girls kind of it's like an autopilot response. Girls are already, you see them in 3-year-old kinder, they're already dissecting a situation of play around who's friends, who's not friends, how am I feeling, how are they feeling? Like they're already doing that. Boys are not doing that at all. Like at all. They're not even remotely on their wavelength. And in school, the more access I've had to seeing boys develop, the more I see that as women, we're like, running on 1,000 different levels, and it's really point blank with them. And I love the simplicity. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying one's right and one's wrong, but it completely changes the way I approach them. Just having that really deep understanding. So because empathy was very important to me and not so important to my son, we developed like a strategy system, and it was like step 1, 2, 3, 4. So whenever he would find himself in this situation, here was step 1, 2, 3, and 4. And in this situation, your go-to is step 1, 2, 3, and 4. And there would be different situations. So, you know, different strategies for play, different strategies for arguments in a footy match, different strategies for you've hurt someone, different strategies, you know. So it's a different set of steps marginally, but ultimately we talk about using I statements. So no one makes you feel anything, you feel something.
Yeah.
So if you're not happy, take that back in, you know, instead of the outward expression making it someone else's fault and problem. When you insert action, I feel. And so that automatically has to make his brain kind of go offline a bit, enough for him to connect to his heart. What is it that I'm feeling? And put a name to it. And we had to talk about feelings and emotions lots. Like, this is all part of growing up, like you're saying when you're a baby, going, you feel really frustrated right now, I can see that you're really hurt, is putting these small steps of, that's what this feels like, and here's the word for it.
Yeah.
It expands their toolkit to then the next step from there is to know what to do with that emotion and how to move through it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't become stagnant in the body. So when you've already got those building blocks, and I'm then saying to him, your strategy is when I feel, insert, and I would like you to. So that you're already providing that person with the understanding of what the exact behaviour issue is, not, you know, these whiny, Jade, like this, and I go, it tells her nothing.
Yeah.
Like, it tells him, her, you know, and you hear it in playgrounds all of the time. They just whine a name, and I'm going, that tells them literally nothing.
And it just grates you too, doesn't it?
Like,
that tone. Man.
Nothing. So, you know, you need to be really specific. They may not even be remotely aware of the effect that their behaviour is having on you. And you have an opportunity to let them know what they're doing, what effect it's having on you, and how you are feeling about it, and your desired outcome. Now, that person's going to choose to do it or not do it, and either way, then, here's step, 1 and 2, depending on, it's like a, what do you call those charts that kind of, come down. So we call them I statements. When I feel, and I would like you to. Then the response this is obviously for older kids, the response statement is always a paraphrase so that they know that that person's been heard, because you only hear kids on a broken record saying the same thing over and over and over, or needing to repeat it when they haven't felt heard.
Yeah.
So you need to be really clear, I've heard what you said. So the paraphrasing statement is an I understand statement. So person B says, I understand that when you feel, and you'd like me to. So they're literally just, and they have to say it back. And I literally, though, if one of them has ever come to me, I'm like, have you said an I statement? Have you said an I understand statement? Then go away. I don't want to hear about it from you until you've said those things. And 9.5 times out of 10, those statements have solved the problem, and they've never had to come to me. It's only that, 1-ish% of the time when someone's not playing well.
Yeah.
And then they require a bit more guidance and facilitation in that.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because by giving them this language around it, even having the language and the words to put to these feelings and emotions takes the sting out of them, and it takes them to something that you can actually work with, as opposed to something that just feels all-consuming. Yes,
they're movable, and there's solution at the end of it. They're not stuck in it, and they don't, they're not in the victim of I have no way out. There's ownership, and there's constructive way forwards, and sometimes they just keep going. I statement, I understand statement, I statement, I understand statement, until they get to a point where both of them are happy with the resolution.
Yeah.
And I have to say, to be honest with you now, they're actually excellent. My oldest two rarely clash, but they're in separate rooms. They're very, very different people. And I think being in the same room actually made that relationship a little bit more difficult for them. Now they're in separate rooms. My eldest shares with my youngest, and that's been fabulous. They're both very similar personalities. And both very clean freaks, and that's worked really well and really strengthened their relationship. So it's really interesting when you pick those dynamics up. With my youngest, and then my youngest came along. My older two are much older. So, 6.5 and 8 years difference between the older two and then my third. So they were way old enough to know, how to play well with a younger child. Occasionally I need to remind them, she's 2, she's 3, you're 10. Sometimes we still do some of that.
Yeah.
And sometimes I can tell when my older two have got some bigger feelings because they'll kind of pick on her. They'll just, and pick on her is not the right word. They will, I guess it is. They'll kind of pick at a scab. Yeah. And they just keep going and go. And particularly my son, he just flicks little bits. And then she explodes and he obviously then gets something out of it. So for me, it's picking up on the little bits and, like you were saying, watching for that, picking an intercepting moment, making eye contact and physical contact with him. So I'll touch his arms, look at him in the eyes. What's going on for you right now? Because you're really annoying your sister. And just getting what's going on for him. I guess I just really sit in the camp of doing exactly what you were doing. And when they get older, just adding more language layers to it. I am really strict on physical sibling stuff. I do really sit quite hardcore in that camp in terms of I think everyone has a right to be safe and feel safe in their bodies, and that it is therefore our responsibility to step in. And it's very much aligned with the RIE approach and aware parenting approach. Both of them still come from the same version of everyone has a right to be safe. And so it's intercepting before the hit, before the slap, before the bite, and being really firm. I won't let you do that. Holding them sometimes, So there is an element of if you're in that kind of danger period, so to speak, or that soup where you can see it's brewing, or those moments where they're more likely to behave like that. You have to be next to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you have to be there ready to, grab that hand before it's made contact with hitting on it. I'm not going to let you hit her. We don't use our bodies to hurt people. And then, da-da-da-da-da. I think the thing with that is you've got to be willing, because the point of those behaviours is that they're still there because there's underlying feelings. So you've got to be willing not just to stop it, but stopping it in the form of like a loving limit, knowing that you're waiting to sit with the rage or the tears that come out. When we want to run from the rage or the tears, that behaviour is going to stay. Yeah,
it just keeps going.
Yeah.
They'll just find another way to make it come out.
Just keeps going. And it doesn't matter what it is, throwing things, hitting, slapping, biting, pinching, it doesn't matter what it is. If we're not actually holding a safe enough space to say, I won't let you do that, and there's safety in those boundaries, but I will listen to the rage that you've got underlying that behaviour, then they're going to keep doing it. And we find ourselves in these patterns. So then it's often coming back to, where do I feel really deeply uncomfortable with my own anger? And therefore with any expression of anger or violence or rage or being out of control, because if we're not able to hold those boundaries, what we're repressing, our kids are expressing.
Yeah. And I've been seeing with that a lot too, because I think, when he's, when I get so triggered by him not, because he's largely such a cooperative child.
Yeah.
That when he's not, I'm like, what do you mean this is not it's not okay? Like, what is this? And then I have to sit with that whole thing within me around like behavior and conforming and expression and what's okay and not okay within our that I see within our family. It brings up a whole host of stuff. And then there's like the layers of mainstream views of children coming into it around you should just behave, kind of external belief systems that come in as well. And then trying to disband those at the same time as provide the limits that need to be provided in order to make everybody feel safe.
There's very fluid dynamics, as all our family dynamics are. But knowing that you've got a toolkit, I think, is what allows you the ability to play with it and the tenacity to stay with it. And that's certainly what you and I are hopefully, with all this waffling, trying to advocate here, is that we recognise that sibling rivalry is difficult because it calls us into a heightened level of parenting for a period of time.
Yeah.
And therefore we might feel like we have less space or less spaciousness. We might be hit with more of our inner child triggers, but that there's toolkits to deal with those and with ourselves in those moments and then after those moments. And that we also have a stacking toolkit from infancy through to, teenagehood that just keeps building one on top of the other on how we teach our children to connect head and heart and how to express that to those around them. That's really what I hope our listeners are getting out of this podcast.
Yeah, me too. And I mean, it's such parenting just can provide such an incredible amount of personal challenge and growth and so much incredible wisdom when you're really able to start to look at the dynamics that are playing out with your kids and asking yourself what you can bring to those to help not only equip them and empower them but also transform your own story, because so much of what's playing out for them is our own story, calling us into it to look more deeply and change it if we want to, which I love.
Yeah.
I mean, our aligned parenting course looks more deeply into that.
Yeah. Actually, speaking of which, we have that coming up in October.
We do, yes.
So feel free to jump on and have a look on nourishingthemother.com.au/online programs, and it'll be under aligned parenting there. Thank you so much for listening. We know sometimes we waffle and we go, I don't know. Hope that resonates with someone. So if it really has, please let us know. Yes. Please, write to us and share the love or connect in some way, because we really enjoy.
We really do.
We really enjoy just connecting with other women on this conscious journey, on this parenting gig that, sometimes has us pulling our hair out. And, it's lovely to feel like you're not alone, isn't it?
It's so true. And we also, of course, love the emails with the suggestions too.
Yeah, for podcast topics.
That you want us to explore. We've done a few of those recently, and it's really great to be able to kind of go where our tribe's seeking to take us, which is awesome.
Absolutely is. So please connect with us on nourishingthemother.com.au, Nourishing the Mother on Facebook and Instagram. And connect with you, Bridget.
Yeah, suburbansandcastles.com. And you, Jules?
Is thepleasurenutritionist.com. And if you do have 5 seconds, we would love for you to rate us on iTunes or leave a review on Facebook. That would really help us continue to get out in the world of mothers. And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.